Sand devils danced across the red horizon of Zerion as the mining crews finished their evening shift. The human colony of Dusthaven looked like a collection of metal bubbles scattered across the desert floor, connected by covered walkways that groaned under the constant assault of wind and grit. 300 souls called this harsh place home, though most days it felt more like a prison sentence than a new beginning. David wiped sweat from his forehead as he reviewed the daily mineral reports. The numbers weren't good. Their extraction equipment was breaking down faster than they could repair it, and the latest shipment of replacement parts wouldn't arrive for another 6 months. If they didn't find a major vein soon, the colony would face abandonment within the year. The alarm that pierced the evening air wasn't the familiar sound of equipment failure or incoming sandstorm. This was the perimeter alert, the one that meant something big was approaching from the wasteland. David grabbed his binoculars and rushed to the observation deck, his heart already racing with possibilities. Raiders were rare this far out, but not impossible. What he saw through the lenses made his blood turn to ice water. A dragon was walking toward their gates. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, its scaled hide a deep crimson that seemed to absorb the dying sunlight. But something was wrong with its silhouette. Where massive wings should have spread from its shoulders, only jagged stumps remained, the edges scarred and ugly. The dragon limped as it walked, favoring its left leg, and carried something small in one clawed hand. David's finger hovered over the emergency beacon that would call for evacuation ships. Every human in the galaxy knew about dragons. They were the unstoppable force that had swept through the outer colonies like wildfire, reducing entire worlds to ash and memory. Their technology was beyond anything humans could match, their warriors bred for conquest and destruction. Seeing one here, even a wounded one, meant death was walking up to their front door. The dragon stopped just outside the colony's main gate and did something that made David question his sanity. It knelt in the red sand, placing whatever it carried on the ground before it. Then it waited. Word spread through Dusthaven like electricity through copper wire. People gathered at windows and on walkways, staring at the impossible sight. Children pressed their faces against reinforced glass while parents pulled them back, not sure if distance would matter against a creature that could supposedly melt steel with its breath. Dr. Amy Chen, the colony's linguist and communications specialist, arrived at David's side carrying her translation equipment. Her hands shook as she adjusted the settings on her universal translator, trying to pick up any signals from the creature below. "It's not moving," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might provoke an attack. "Just kneeling there. That's not normal dragon behavior, is it?" David shook his head. Nothing about this was normal. Dragons didn't kneel. They conquered. They burned. They moved on to the next target. They certainly didn't show up alone and injured at the gates of a human settlement and wait patiently for permission to enter. Engineer Pete Santos joined them, carrying his heaviest wrench like a weapon. Behind him came more colonists, forming a nervous crowd of miners, technicians, farmers, and shopkeepers who had never expected to face their species' greatest enemy, with nothing but hand tools and determination. "What's it want?" Pete asked, his voice barely controlled. "Why isn't it attacking?" Through the observation deck speakers, Amy's translator suddenly crackled to life. The words that emerged were broken and heavily accented, spoken in a voice like grinding stone, but unmistakably in universal standard. "Seeking, colony leader, have debt, honor debt to repay." The gathered colonists exchanged glances of confusion and terror. David felt his mouth go dry as desert sand. A dragon talking about honor debt wasn't in any of the intelligence reports he'd studied. Dragons took what they wanted and destroyed what they couldn't use. They didn't negotiate or make bargains. "Should we try to talk to it?" Amy asked, her finger hovering over the communication controls. Before David could answer, the dragon spoke again, its voice carrying clearly across the desert air even without amplification. "I am Corthane, once of the Fire Clan, now of no clan. I bring proof of great shame. Seek to make right what was made wrong." The dragon, Corthane, lifted the object it had been carrying. Even from their elevated position, David could see it was a boot. A human military boot dark with stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Pete cursed under his breath. Several colonists stepped back from the windows. The sight of that boot transformed their fear into something deeper and more primal. This wasn't just a random encounter. The dragon had come here with purpose, carrying evidence of some past violence against their kind. David made a decision that would change everything. He activated the external communication system, his voice echoing across the settlement as he spoke. "I am David, leader of this colony. What do you want with us?" Corthane's massive head lifted, revealing eyes that glowed like amber in the fading light. When he spoke, there was something in his voice that David hadn't expected to hear from a dragon. Sadness. "This boot belonged to human warrior, brave human who died protecting others of your kind. I watched his death, did nothing to prevent it. Now I carry shame like poison in my blood. Seek way to honor his sacrifice, to make amends for failure of courage." The silence that followed was complete. No one in the colony spoke or moved. The only sound was the eternal whisper of wind across sand and the distant hum of life support systems working to keep their fragile bubble of civilization alive in the hostile desert. Amy was the first to break the spell, her voice barely a whisper. "David, I think it's telling the truth. The linguistic patterns, the emotional markers in its speech. This isn't deception. It's genuine remorse." David stared down at the kneeling dragon, this creature that could probably tear through their defensive systems like paper, yet chose instead to kneel in supplication with a bloody boot as its only offering. Everything he'd been taught about dragons said this was impossible. They were monsters, pure and simple, killing machines without conscience or mercy. But monsters didn't speak of shame and honor. They didn't kneel in the sand and beg forgiveness from their former victims. "Open the gates," David said quietly. Pete nearly dropped his wrench. "David, you can't be serious. That thing could kill us all. Look at it, Pete, really look. Those aren't the actions of a killer. That's someone asking for redemption." As the colony's main gate slowly ground open, Corthane rose to his feet and walked forward with the measured pace of someone approaching a sacred place. The bloody boot remained clutched in his massive hand, and his eyes never left David's face as he entered Dusthaven. The first dragon to set foot in a human settlement without hostile intent had arrived, carrying the weight of the dead and the hope of something unprecedented in the galaxy's blood-soaked history. 3 days had passed since Corthane entered Dusthaven, and the colony felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The dragon had taken up residence in the empty storage bay near the main gate, refusing offers of better shelter and eating only the basic rations the colonists provided. He spent most of his time sitting in silence, the blood-stained boot placed carefully on a makeshift altar he'd constructed from mining equipment. Dr. Amy had worked around the clock with her translation programs, slowly building a communication bridge between human and dragon languages. Each conversation revealed more disturbing details about their unexpected guest and the burden he carried. The breakthrough came during the evening meal, when Amy finally managed to establish clear two-way communication through her improved translation matrix. The colonists gathered in the main assembly hall, maintaining careful distance from Corthane while he told them the story behind the boot. 3 standard years ago, my clan attacked human military outpost on moon designated, your maps call it Sigma 7. Small base, maybe 200 soldiers and support staff. Should have been simple conquest like many others before. David watched Corthane's expression as he spoke. The dragon's amber eyes remained fixed on the boot, as if seeing the events play out again in its scuffed surface. But something was different. Humans fought with unexpected strategy. Not just brave, but smart. They knew they could not win, but they delayed us. Made us work for every meter of ground. My commander, General Vashistar, grew angry at the resistance. Amy leaned forward, her recorder capturing every word. What made this battle different from others? Corthane's claws scraped against the metal floor as his hands clenched into fists. We discovered why they fought so hard. Civilian transport ships were evacuating nearby settlements. The military base was buying time, sacrificing themselves so others could escape. This was not in our intelligence reports. We expected to find soldiers protecting resources. Instead, we found soldiers protecting lives. Pete shifted uncomfortably in his chair. So you decided to make an example of them? Not me, but my commander, yes. Vashtar ordered captured prisoners to be interrogated. He wanted evacuation routes, destination coordinates, ship manifests, information that would let us hunt down the fleeing civilians and complete the cleansing. The word cleansing sent a chill through the assembled colonists. They all knew what it meant when dragons talked about cleansing. It meant the complete extermination of human presence in a system. Corthane continued, his voice growing heavier with each word. Most prisoners broke quickly under questioning. Pain has a way of loosening tongues regardless of species, but one human refused to speak. Young soldier, maybe 25 standard years, private rank, designation Johnson according to his identity tags. The dragon reached out and touched the boot with surprising gentleness. This belonged to him. Only thing that survived the interrogation intact. David felt his stomach twist. How long did they question him? 2 days. 2 days of pain that would have broken any dragon warrior within hours. But this Johnson, he said nothing useful. Gave false coordinates that led to empty space. Provided fake ship codes that matched no known vessels. Even when Vashatar brought in the mind probe devices, Johnson found ways to resist. Amy's face had gone pale. Mind probes? Those can kill humans. Johnson knew this. We all knew this. But he continued to resist, continued to protect the information that would save his people. On the second day, when the probes finally burned out his mind completely, his last words were not pleas for mercy or cries of pain. He smiled at Vashatar and said, "You're too late. They're already safe." The assembly hall fell silent except for the hum of air recyclers and the distant whisper of sand against the dome walls. Several colonists wiped away tears, while others sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of Johnson's sacrifice. After he died, Corthane continued, Vashatar ordered the body disposed of with the other waste. But I could not forget what I had witnessed. This human had shown courage beyond anything in our warrior codes. He died not for territory or resources or glory, but to protect strangers he would never meet, children and families he had never seen. Corthine lifted the boot, examining it in the artificial light. I recovered this from the disposal units. Told myself it was a trophy, a reminder of human stubbornness. But I knew the truth. It was proof of something I had never seen before. Pure selflessness, is that why you were exiled? David asked. Because you questioned the execution? Not at first. I continued to serve, continued to follow orders. But Johnson's sacrifice changed something in my mind. Every subsequent battle, I found myself wondering which humans we killed might have been protecting others. Which fathers died buying time for their children to escape. Which mothers chose death over betraying their families. Corthane's scarred wing stumps twitched, a nervous gesture Amy had noticed during their translation sessions. The breaking point came 6 months later. We were ordered to attack a civilian evacuation convoy, unarmed transport ships carrying refugees from a world we had already conquered. Standard procedure was to destroy them all, prevent any humans from establishing new colonies elsewhere. But you refused, Amy said, understanding dawning in her voice. I refused, told Vashatar that hunting fleeing civilians was beneath the honor of the Fire Clan, that our strength should be tested against warriors, not spent slaughtering the helpless. My words were considered treason. My wings were severed as punishment. My rank stripped, my clan name revoked. I was cast out to die alone in the void. The dragon's massive form seemed to shrink as he recounted his exile. But I did not die. I survived, carrying this boot and the memory of Johnson's courage. Spent 2 years wandering the outer systems, trying to understand what I had witnessed, trying to find way to honor a debt I owed to a dead human who had shown me what true strength looked like. David leaned forward. And that's what brought you here? The need to repay this debt? Johnson died protecting humans he would never meet. I failed to protect a human I watched die in front of me. The scales are unbalanced. Until I find a way to save human lives equal to those his sacrifice protected, I will carry this shame. Engineer Pete spoke up from the back of the room. How do you know his sacrifice actually worked? How do you know anyone escaped? Corthane's amber eyes met Pete's directly. Because 3 months after Johnson's death, I accessed intelligence reports on the Sigma-7 operation. The civilian evacuation was successful. 47 transport ships reached safe harbor in human space. Over 30,000 civilians survived because one soldier chose death over betrayal. The number hit the colonists like a physical blow. 30,000 lives saved by one man's refusal to break under torture. The magnitude of Johnson's sacrifice suddenly became real, measurable, undeniable. So you came here to balance the scales, David said slowly. To save human lives, to honor his memory. Yes, but also to learn. Johnson showed me something my people do not understand. Strength that comes not from inflicting pain but from enduring it. Power that grows not from taking but from giving. Your species possesses something dragons have forgotten, if we ever knew it at all. Amy wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at the scarred, exiled warrior holding a dead soldier's boot like a religious relic. What do you call it? This thing humans have that dragons don't understand? Corthane was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words in a language that wasn't his own. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of revelation. Hope, you call it hope, and it is the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy. The argument in the Colony Council chamber had been raging for 2 hours, and David could feel his patience wearing thin. Half the colonists wanted Corthane gone immediately, while the other half insisted he'd proven his peaceful intentions. The debate might have continued all night, if not for the sudden wailing of the weather emergency siren. Category 5 storm incoming from the northeast, announced weather technician Rita over the intercom. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. All personnel to emergency stations. The council chamber emptied as colonists rushed to secure equipment and prepare for what meteorologists called a planet killer. These massive sandstorms could strip paint from metal and bury entire settlements under tons of debris. Dusthaven had survived 3 such storms since its founding, but each one had cost them dearly in damaged equipment and lost infrastructure. David found himself standing alone with Corthane in the now empty chamber. The dragon had remained silent throughout the heated debate about his fate, but now he spoke with quiet urgency. This storm, it threatens your water reclamation plant. David nodded grimly. Our main facility is in the path of the storm front. We'll lose 60% of our water production capacity if it takes a direct hit. Show me your defensive preparations. For a moment, David hesitated. Sharing critical infrastructure details with a dragon, even a seemingly friendly one, violated every security protocol he'd ever learned. But desperation had a way of overriding caution. They made their way through the covered walkways to the reclamation facility, a massive complex of pipes, filters, and processing tanks that extracted precious moisture from the desert air and recycled every drop of water the colony used. Without it, Dusthaven would become uninhabitable within weeks. Engineer Pete was already there with his emergency crew, frantically securing loose equipment and checking structural supports. The facility had been built to withstand normal weather, but Category 5 storms were anything but normal. We're going to lose the primary intake manifold, Pete reported, pointing to a crucial pipe junction 50 feet above ground level. The wind shear will tear it right off the main structure. Without it, the whole system shuts down. David studied the problem with growing dread. The manifold was too high for normal repair scaffolding, and too exposed for anyone to reach safely during the storm. They'd have to shut down the system entirely, and hope the housing could protect the internal components. There is another way, Corthane said quietly. Both humans turned to stare at the dragon. Even with his wings severed, he still stood nearly 9 feet tall with the build of a creature designed for physical extremes. I can reach the manifold. My people are adapted for harsh environments. Wind and debris that would kill humans will only injure me. Pete shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. That storm will be throwing around chunks of metal like bullets. Nothing can survive up there, dragons can. We evolved on worlds where such storms were daily occurrences. My bones are denser than yours, my hide thicker, my reflexes faster. What would destroy you will merely hurt me. David felt torn between hope and suspicion. Why would you risk your life for our equipment? Corthane's amber eyes fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. Because 30,000 humans are alive because of Johnson's sacrifice. If this colony dies from thirst, how many future lives are lost? How many children never born? How many discoveries never made? How many acts of courage never performed? The debt grows with every life not lived. The storm arrived exactly on schedule, hitting Dusthaven like the fist of an angry god. Wind speeds exceeded 300 kilometers per hour, turning the desert sand into a grinding, roaring wall of destruction that blocked out the sun. The colony's domes groaned under the assault while emergency power struggled to keep life support systems running. Inside the reclamation facility, Pete monitored the structural stress readings with growing alarm. The primary manifold was holding, but massive vibrations were loosening its connection points. Without intervention, it would fail within the hour. I'm going out there, Corthane announced, checking the tool harness Pete had rigged for him. This is insane, Pete muttered, but he handed over the specialized wrenches needed to tighten the manifold bolts. The safety line won't hold in this wind. You'll be on your own up there. Corthane nodded and stepped into the maintenance airlock. Through the reinforced windows, David watched the dragon emerge into hell itself. The wind immediately tried to tear him from the access ladder, but his claws found purchase in the metal rungs. Step by agonizing step, he climbed toward the failing manifold. Halfway up, a piece of flying debris struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around the ladder like a rag doll. For a terrifying moment, David thought they'd lost him. But Corthane's grip held, and he resumed climbing. The manifold junction was a maze of pipes and connectors 50 feet above the ground, fully exposed to the storm's fury. Corthane reached it just as the primary coupling began to separate, the massive pipe swaying dangerously in the wind. Working with tools designed for human hands, he began tightening the loosened bolts while debris hammered his body like artillery shells. Then disaster struck. A section of roofing torn from a storage building became a flying missile, striking the ladder below Corthane and severing it completely. The dragon was now trapped on the swaying manifold structure with no way down, while the storm continued to tear at both him and the equipment he was trying to save. "We have to get him down," Amy shouted over the wind noise. She'd been monitoring communications, though the storm made radio contact impossible. "How?" Pete demanded. "The backup ladder is in the main storage bay. It'll take an hour to deploy in these conditions." Through the observation window, they watched Corthane make an impossible decision. Instead of trying to save himself, he used his own body as a shield, wrapping his arms around the most critical junction points and letting the storm batter him, while protecting the equipment underneath. For 3 hours, the dragon endured punishment that would have killed any human in minutes. His scarred wing stumps spread wide, creating windbreaks that reduced the stress on delicate components. When flying debris threatened crucial pipe connections, he took the impacts on his own body. When wind shear tried to tear apart the manifold assembly, he held it together with raw strength. By the time the storm finally passed, Corthane was barely conscious. His hide was shredded from countless impacts, his left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and dark blood pooled beneath him on the platform. But the water reclamation system was intact and fully functional. The rescue took another hour. Using the backup ladder and every safety line they could find, Pete's team managed to bring the wounded dragon down to ground level. Dr. Amy, who had some medical training, did her best to treat his injuries with their limited supplies. As Corthane drifted in and out of consciousness, he kept mumbling the same words over and over. Amy finally managed to translate them through her damaged equipment. "The water flows. The children will not thirst. The debt is smaller now." David knelt beside the injured dragon, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't just about repaying an honor debt to a dead soldier. Corthane was trying to prove that dragons could be something other than destroyers, that they could protect instead of conquering, preserve instead of consuming. "Why?" David asked when Corthane's eyes focused clearly. "Why risk everything for people you barely know?" The dragon's voice was weak but steady. "Because Johnson would have done the same. Because this is what hope looks like when it has claws and scales instead of soft skin and fragile bones." Pete looked up from his equipment readings, amazement clear in his voice. "The manifold is actually stronger than before. The way he reinforced those joints. I've never seen engineering like that. It's like he knew exactly how the metal would respond to stress." As the colonists worked to treat Corthane's injuries and repair storm damage, word of his sacrifice spread through Dusthaven. The dragon who could have left them to die in the storm had instead nearly died to save them. The creature they'd feared as a monster had proven himself a protector. In the colony's main plaza, someone had placed Johnson's bloody boot beside a dragon scale that had been torn loose during the storm. 2 pieces of evidence, 2 different species, 2 acts of sacrifice separated by years, but united by the same unbreakable principle. Some things were worth dying for, and sometimes, the most important thing you could do was live for them instead. Recovery from the Great Storm took weeks, but the changes in Dusthaven went far deeper than repaired buildings and restored equipment. Corthane's sacrifice during the crisis had shifted something fundamental in how the colonists saw their unexpected guest. Fear had transformed into cautious respect, then grudging acceptance, and finally into something approaching trust. The dragon's injuries healed slowly but steadily, his natural resilience proving as remarkable as his courage. While he recovered, he began sharing knowledge that no human had ever possessed before. Dragon military tactics, weaknesses in their seemingly invincible war machines, insights into their culture and psychology that could revolutionize human defensive strategies. "Your fortifications are built wrong," Corthane explained to Pete as they surveyed the colony's defensive perimeter. His left arm was still in a makeshift sling, but he gestured effectively with his good hand. You think like prey animals, building walls to hide behind. Dragons think like predators. We see walls as challenges to overcome, not barriers to respect. Pete frowned at the criticism. So how should we build defenses? Not like walls. Like mazes. Dragons rely on overwhelming force applied quickly. We expect to break through obstacles and continue attacking. But if obstacles redirect us instead of stopping us, if they force us to fight where we are weak instead of where we are strong. Corthane paused, searching for the right words in human language. Think of water flowing down a hill. You cannot stop it with a dam, but you can channel it where you want it to go. Under Corthane's guidance, the colonists began redesigning their defenses. Instead of high walls meant to keep attackers out, they built a series of reinforced corridors that would funnel any assault force into predetermined kill zones. Narrow passages that negated size advantages, sharp turns that prevented coordinated charges, multiple levels that split attacking forces and made them vulnerable to crossfire. The work was exhausting, but the colonists threw themselves into it with surprising enthusiasm. For the first time since arriving on Zerion, they felt like they were building something that might actually protect them, instead of just delaying the inevitable. The breakthrough in human-dragon relations came from an unexpected source. 8-year-old Lily Martinez had lost her parents in a dragon raid 2 years earlier, and had been raised by her grandmother since then. She was one of the few colonists who showed no fear of Corthane, treating him with the casual acceptance that only children could manage. "Why don't you have wings anymore?" she asked one afternoon while Corthane worked on defense calculations. The directness that made adults uncomfortable seemed perfectly natural to her. Corthane paused in his work, considering how to explain exile and punishment to a human child. "I made choices my people did not approve of. The wings were removed as punishment. Does it hurt? Yes, but not as much as it would hurt to still have them." Lily tilted her head, puzzled. "Why would having wings hurt?" "Because they would remind me of all the terrible things I did when I could fly. The places I helped destroy, the people I failed to protect. Sometimes the absence of something painful is better than its presence." The child considered this with the seriousness that children brought to important questions. "My mama and papa died in a dragon attack. I used to have nightmares about dragons with big wings and fire breath." Corthane went very still. "Do you still have those nightmares?" "Not about you. You're different. You don't want to hurt people anymore." She reached out and touched one of the ugly scars where his wings had been severed. "These scars mean you changed your mind about being mean, right?" "Yes," Corthane said quietly. "They mean I changed my mind." From that day forward, Lily appointed herself as Corthane's unofficial assistant, bringing him tools when he worked on defenses and asking endless questions about dragon culture. Her easy acceptance of the former enemy helped other colonists overcome their remaining fears. If a child whose parents had been killed by dragons could trust Corthane, perhaps the rest of them could too. The real test of their growing alliance came when long-range sensors detected movement in the outer system. 3 dragon ships were approaching Zerion, moving with the deliberate pace of a military patrol. They would reach Dusthaven within the week. The discovery sent panic through the colony until Corthane identified the ships from their energy signatures. "The lead vessel is the Flame of Conquest, Vashtar's flagship. My former commander comes to finish what I left undone." David felt his stomach drop. "He's coming for you?" "He is coming for all of you. When a dragon force is assigned to cleanse a system, they do not stop until the task is complete. My exile changed nothing about the original mission. If anything, it gave Vashtar additional motivation to ensure no human survived to spread word of dragon weakness." The colonists gathered in emergency session to decide their response. Some favored immediate evacuation, though their transport capacity was limited and dragon ships were faster than anything they possessed. Others wanted to make a stand, though their defenses were still incomplete and untested. "How many dragons are we talking about?" Amy asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. 60 warriors plus support crew. They will expect to find a defenseless human settlement, and perhaps one exiled dragon waiting to die. They will not expect organized resistance. Pete studied the defensive improvements they'd made under Corthane's guidance. "Will it be enough?" "Not to win, but perhaps enough to survive until rescue arrives if you have called for help." David shook his head grimly. "Help is 6 months away minimum. We're on our own." Corthane was quiet for a long moment, His amber eyes focused on something beyond the walls of the meeting room. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. There is one strategy that might work, but it requires me to act as bait while you execute the defense plan. It is essentially a suicide mission for me, though it offers you the best chance of survival. No, Lily said from where she sat beside her grandmother. The adults had forgotten she was there. You can't die. Who would help us build more defenses? Child? This is the only way to honor the debt I owe to Johnson's memory. His sacrifice saved 30,000 lives. If my sacrifice saves 300, the mathematics are clear. But Lily shook her head with the stubborn certainty of childhood. Johnson didn't die to make you feel better about yourself. He died because people needed protecting. We still need protecting, so you can't die yet. The simple logic from an 8-year-old hit harder than any complex strategic argument. Corthane stared at the child for a long moment, then looked around the room at the faces of the colonists who had accepted him despite everything his species had done to theirs. Then we find another way, he said finally. We find a way for all of us to survive. As the dragon ships drew closer to Zerion, the colonists worked around the clock to complete their defenses. But more importantly, they worked to complete something that had never existed before in the galaxy's bloody history. A true alliance between human and dragon, forged in the crucible of mutual respect and tested by the promise of mutual sacrifice. In the colony's memorial garden, Johnson's boot and Corthane's severed wing scale sat side by side, symbols of two different kinds of courage that had somehow found common ground. Around them grew the first flowers to bloom in Dusthaven's harsh environment, life persisting against all odds in the most unlikely places. Change was coming to Zerion, carried by 3 dragon warships and 60 trained killers. But change was already here in Dusthaven, written in defensive positions that channeled rather than blocked, in trust that bridged species barriers, and in the quiet determination of humans and one dragon who had decided that some things were worth fighting for together. The galaxy was about to discover that hope, when properly fortified and strategically applied, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. Dawn on Zerion brought no comfort to the colonists of Dusthaven. The dragon ships hung in orbit like 3 dark stars, their angular hulls reflecting the weak sunlight with predatory grace. Long-range scans confirmed Corthane's worst fears. The flame of conquest and its escorts carried enough firepower to reduce the colony to molten slag within minutes, and enough warriors to hunt down any survivors who might escape the initial bombardment. In the colony's command center, Corthane studied the tactical displays with the practiced eye of a former military commander. The news was not good. Vashtor had positioned his ships to cover all possible escape routes while maintaining orbital bombardment capability. There would be no running from this fight. They will land at first light tomorrow, Corthane announced to the assembled colonists. Vashitar prefers ground combat when possible. He sees orbital bombardment as wasteful, destroying resources that could be captured intact. David nodded grimly. That gives us maybe 18 hours to finish preparations. Will it be enough? It will have to be. Corthane turned to Pete, who had emerged as their unofficial military engineer. The mining tunnels are ready? Pete consulted his tablet, checking off items from a list that read like a manual for asymmetric warfare. Charges are placed at 17 strategic points. We can collapse selected sections on command, creating the maze pattern you designed. The kill zones are prepared, and we've stockpiled ammunition at each position. And the evacuation routes? Sealed and hidden. If everything goes wrong, the children and non-combatants can retreat through the old survey shafts to the emergency shelter 3 kilometers underground. They'll have enough supplies to last 6 months. Dr. Amy looked up from her communication equipment. I've managed to get a message drone away despite their jamming. Help will know what happened here, even if none of us survived to tell the story. The preparations had transformed Dusthaven from a simple mining colony into something unprecedented in human military history. A settlement designed to fight dragons using their own tactical principles against them. Instead of trying to match superior firepower with desperation, they would use the aliens' expectations and instincts to lead them into carefully prepared traps. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Dragons expected humans to flee or surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. They had never encountered organized resistance that used dragon psychology as a weapon. Corthane's insights into his own species had revealed weaknesses that no human military analyst had ever imagined. Remember, Corthane addressed the assembled defenders. Dragons are pack hunters who rely on dominance and intimidation. They expect their enemies to scatter when challenged by superior force. Our victory depends on doing exactly what they do not expect. We stay together, we support each other, and we make them fight our kind of battle instead of theirs. Young Lily raised her hand from where she sat with the other children scheduled for evacuation. What if they try to burn everything with fire breath? Corthane managed something that might have been a smile on his scaled features. Dragons do not actually breathe fire, little one. That is a myth your people created. We use plasma weapons that your stories confused with natural flame, but the principle is the same. We will use their weapons against them by fighting in spaces where they cannot bring their full power to bear. As night fell over Zerion, the colonists made their final preparations. Weapons were distributed and tested, communication protocols reviewed, and last messages recorded for families who might never see home again. In the memorial garden, someone had placed fresh flowers around Johnson's boot and Corthane's wing scale, a reminder of the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. The attack began exactly as Corthane had predicted. 3 landing craft descended from orbit in the pre-dawn darkness, disgorging 60 dragon warriors onto the desert floor outside Dusthaven's main entrance. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat, their plasma weapons glowing like malevolent stars in the darkness. General Vashitar led from the front, his massive form unmistakable even in the shadows. He was larger than Corthane, his wings intact and impressive, his ornate armor marking him as a veteran of countless successful campaigns. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the desert air. Humans of this settlement, I am General Vashitar of the Fire Clan. You harbor a traitor and criminal of our people. Surrender him to us and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will make your suffering last for days. The response came not from the colony's communication system, but from Corthane himself, stepping into view on the settlement's main wall. The sight of his former subordinate, wingless and scarred but defiant, sent a ripple of surprise through the dragon assault force. I am here, Vashitar. I have been waiting for you. So the coward finally shows himself. Did you think these soft creatures could protect you from justice? No, I thought they could teach me what justice actually means. Vashitar's laugh was like grinding stone. You always were too philosophical for a warrior. Come down and face your punishment like the dragon you once were. I am not the same dragon who served under you, and these humans are not the same prey you are used to hunting. You will find that much has changed since we last met. The first phase of the battle went exactly according to plan. Vashtar, enraged by his former subordinate's defiance, ordered a direct assault on the colony's main entrance. The dragon warriors advanced in their traditional formation, expecting to smash through human defenses with overwhelming force and superior firepower. Instead, they found themselves funneled into the narrow corridors that Pete's engineering team had prepared. The passages were too small for effective formation fighting, forcing the dragons to advance in single file, while human defenders fired from protected positions above and beside them. Plasma weapons that could melt through starship armor found their effectiveness severely reduced in the confined spaces. The second phase began when the dragons realized they were being led into a trap. But by then it was too late to retreat effectively. Corthane's strategic placement of the maze had cut their force into smaller groups, each one isolated and vulnerable to coordinated human attacks. Warriors who had never known fear found themselves confused and disoriented, fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to established patterns. This is impossible, Vashitar snarled as his third assault team fell back with heavy casualties. Humans do not fight like this. They scatter and flee. They beg for mercy. From his position overlooking the battlefield, Corthane called down to his former commander. These humans learned from watching Johnson die. They discovered that courage is not about feeling no fear. It is about doing what must be done despite the fear. The third phase of the battle was the most dangerous. Recognizing that their standard tactics were failing, the dragons began adapting their approach. Vashtar ordered his remaining forces to spread out and search for alternative entry points, using their superior mobility to bypass the prepared defenses. This was where Corthane's most desperate gambit came into play. Instead of trying to defend the entire perimeter, the colonists abandoned their outer positions and fell back to a central stronghold around the main habitat domes. But they didn't retreat empty-handed. As they withdrew, They triggered the mining charges Pete had placed throughout the tunnel system. The explosions that followed weren't designed to kill dragons directly. Instead, they collapsed specific sections of the underground network, creating a maze of blocked passages that forced the attackers to move through predetermined routes. Routes that led directly into the final killing ground that the humans had prepared. As the battle raged through the night and into the dawn, both sides paid a terrible price. Dragon warriors fell to human ingenuity and desperation, while colonists died defending their homes and families. But something unprecedented was happening on the red sands of Zerion. For the first time in galactic history, humans were not just surviving a dragon assault, they were winning. In the memorial garden at the heart of Dusthaven, Johnson's boot and Corthane's wing scale sat surrounded by the chaos of battle. Reminders that sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from convincing them that there was something better worth fighting for. The sun reached its peak over Zerion as the final phase of the battle began. Half of Vashtar's force lay dead or wounded in the maze of collapsed tunnels and prepared kill zones, while the surviving dragons found themselves trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. Their superior technology and training meant nothing in the confined spaces where the humans had chosen to make their stand. But the colonists had paid a terrible price for their unlikely victory. Nearly 40 defenders had fallen, and ammunition was running critically low. David coordinated the defense from the command bunker, while Dr. Amy worked frantically to treat the wounded with their limited medical supplies. The smell of plasma burns and blood filled the air, mixing with the ever-present scent of red desert sand. In the central plaza, Corthane faced the most difficult decision of his long life. His strategic guidance had brought them this far, but the final confrontation would require something more than military tactics. It would require a sacrifice that went beyond anything Johnson had endured in that interrogation chamber 3 years ago. Vashtar will not surrender, he explained to David through the communication link. Dragon military doctrine does not permit retreat from inferior forces. He will keep attacking until either all humans are dead or his entire force is destroyed. So what do? We can't hold out much longer. There is one option remaining. If I challenge him to personal combat, Dragon honor codes will compel him to accept. Winner takes all. His forces stand down if he falls, or you surrender if I do. David's voice crackled with static and exhaustion. That's suicide. He's bigger than you, better armed, and you're already wounded from the storm. Perhaps. But it is the only way to end this without losing everyone we have fought to protect. Before David could respond, the communication link exploded in gunfire and shouting. Vashtar had broken through the final defensive line and was advancing on the colony's main habitat domes. His remaining 20 warriors spread out behind him, their plasma weapons charging for a final devastating assault. But something stopped them cold. 8-year-old Lily Martinez stood in the plaza between the advancing dragons and the colony's emergency shelter, holding Johnson's bloody boot in her small hands. Her grandmother tried to pull her back, but the child held her ground with the terrible courage that only comes from complete innocence. This belonged to a brave soldier, she called out to Vashtar, in the broken dragon language that Corthane had been teaching her. He died protecting people like me. Are you brave like he was, or are you just big and mean? The enormous dragon general stopped dead in his tracks, staring down at the tiny human who dared to question his courage. Behind him, his warriors shifted uneasily, uncertain how to respond to a challenge from a child. Remove this hatchling from my path, Vashtar commanded, but none of his soldiers moved to obey. Something about the scene had frozen them in place. A human child standing alone with a dead soldier's boot, asking questions that cut to the very heart of what it meant to be a warrior. That was when Corthane emerged from the command bunker, walking slowly across the plaza toward his former commander. His wounds from the storm and the battle were clearly visible, dark blood staining his scales, but his amber eyes burned with unshakable resolve. The child asks a fair question, Vashtar. Are we warriors, or are we simply killers? Do we serve honor, or do we serve only ourselves? You dare lecture me about honor? You who betrayed your own species for these soft creatures? I learned from these soft creatures. They showed me what I had forgotten. That true strength comes not from destroying your enemies, but from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Corthane knelt beside Lily, gently taking Johnson's boot from her hands and placing it on the ground between himself and Vashtar. Then he carefully removed one of his own severed wing scales and placed it beside the boot. This human soldier died to save 30,000 strangers. I live to honor his memory by protecting 300 more. If that is betrayal, then I choose betrayal over blind obedience. Vashtar's massive form trembled with rage. You have forgotten who you are. You have forgotten what we are. No. I have remembered what we could be. The challenge, when it came, was delivered in the ancient formal style that predated the Dragon Empire by millennia. Vashtar could not refuse without losing face before his own troops, and Corthane knew it. The two dragons circled each other in the plaza while humans and aliens alike watched from the surrounding buildings. The combat was brutal and swift. Vashtar's superior size and intact wings gave him overwhelming advantages, but Corthane had learned something during his time with the colonists. He had learned to fight not for dominance but for survival, not for glory, but for others. When Vashtar's claws opened deep gashes across his chest, Corthane used the general's momentum to drive him into the maze of defensive obstacles. When plasma fire scorched his left shoulder, he ducked behind cover and used the confined space to negate his opponent's reach advantage. For every wound he received, he gave back too, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Vashtar was a career soldier at the peak of his powers, while Corthane was an exile weakened by injury and months of hardship. The end came when the general's wing talons found their mark, driving deep into Corthane's torso and lifting him off the ground. Die knowing that your sacrifice was meaningless, Vashtar snarled. These humans will burn just as all the others burned. Corthane's response was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sudden silence. Look around you, old friend. Look at your warriors. Vashtar turned his massive head and saw something that shook him to his core. His soldiers were not preparing for the final assault. Instead, they stood in stunned silence, staring at the scene before them. A dragon dying to protect humans. A child who faced down armed warriors with nothing but a dead soldier's boot. Humans who had fought with desperate courage against impossible odds, asking for nothing but the right to exist. One by one, the dragon warriors began laying down their weapons. First the youngest, then the veterans, then finally the senior officers. They had come to Zerion expecting to find prey and cowards. Instead, they had found something that challenged everything they believed about strength and honor. This is mutiny, Vashtar roared, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he could see that something fundamental had changed in his soldiers. This is choice, gasped Corthane from where he lay dying in the red sand. The same choice Johnson made. The same choice these humans made. The choice to be something better than what others expect you to be. As his life ebbed away, Corthane watched young Lily approach his fallen form. She knelt beside him and gently placed one small hand on his scarred snout, offering comfort to a dying alien who had given everything to protect her people. Thank you, she whispered. Johnson would be proud of you. The funeral 3 days later was unlike anything in galactic history. Humans and dragons stood together in the memorial garden, honoring the sacrifice of two warriors who had found common ground in the midst of ancient hatred. Johnson's boot and Corthane's wing scale were buried together beneath a marker that bore words in both languages. Some things are worth dying for, but more things are worth living for. General Vashtar departed Zerion with less than half his original force. The rest chose to remain, asking for asylum and the chance to learn what Corthane had discovered among the humans. The Dragon Empire's first military defection sent shockwaves throughout both species, proving that change was possible even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Word of the Battle of Dusthaven spread through human space like wildfire, inspiring colonies that had given up hope and military leaders who had accepted defeat as inevitable. More importantly, it spread through dragon space as well, reaching soldiers who had begun to question their role as conquerors and civilians, who had never known that alternatives existed. In the years that followed, Dusthaven became something unprecedented, a place where two species learned to live and work together, sharing knowledge and building something neither could have achieved alone. The mining colony that had barely survived its first year became a thriving settlement that attracted visitors from across the galaxy. And in the memorial garden at its heart, flowers bloomed around the grave of a human soldier and a dragon warrior who had never met in life but had found each other in death, two symbols of sacrifice from different worlds, proving that honor and courage were not the exclusive property of any single species. The universe was vast and often cruel, filled with predators and prey, conquerors and victims. But sometimes, in the most unlikely places, it produced something better. Sometimes it produced heroes who understood that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the willingness to protect. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.